Okay, so my name is Blankenship, and I'm a PhD student at University of Kentucky, as said. And today I'll be presenting on the concept of direct interaction in web map development and the implications of using such an approach. So very much a meta presentation involving a lot of the user-centric stuff, but also bringing it back on the map creators, cartographers themselves. This presentation and the content was co-developed by Dr. Rich Donohue, who's unfortunately not with us today. There's also a link if you want to follow along on your mobile devices, tablets, computers, you can do so. It's touch and accessible friendly. So at the start of 2018, I began taking classes through the New Maps Plus graduate program with the goal of improving my languaging JavaScript and web design skills. And if you're not familiar with New Maps Plus, it's a graduate certificate and degree program that focuses on web-based geovisualization, spatial data analysis using JavaScript, Python, a bunch of other data tools. And these courses reignited my passion for and appreciation for cartography and spatial visualizations, specifically web maps. However, throughout these courses, I started to notice certain limitations in the standard web map medium. And this is, once again, a culmination of my private sector and government sector work as well, and kind of some things I've seen that bother me about web maps. So one of the initial projects was this map of Kenyan primary school student recidivism in 2014. The map provides several interactions from the hover responses with graphs on the map to the grade slider in the lower left corner of the map canvas. So in addition to the title, brief synopsis, and description of the map, there was links to data, references, and the author were provided to the map reader. However, despite all of this, and this being obviously an educational sample, it's still unclear what I, as the map developer and designer, am trying to do with this map. So I set up to find better ways of presenting not only maps, but their intent, meaning, and messages as produced by social scientists trying to represent their research via web maps and the web-based platform. So this initial attempt is something I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the narrative map, which I don't conflate with story maps. Like, consider those two kind of separate things. This particular map leverages D3 and leaflet to create a hybrid experience for the map reader. So instead of giving the map reader immediate control over the map data, I give them a controlled path through which they can listen to the narrative I'm attempting to create with this map. The title and initial view presents the topics and problems to address, or that are to be addressed with this map, namely Bitcoin, accessibility, and equality. Then through the majority of the website, all the map reader can do is scroll, being led through the elements of the map to come in a way that a typical static legend just can't accomplish. The reader is given colors and descriptions that connect the topics and problems to the forthcoming leaflet map, which allow them to situate their readings within a very specified critical avenue. So when arriving at the interactive map, the map reader can explore the elements and come to their own conclusions and critiques based on the context of the map. Context that the map creator has provided them, producing a much more focused reading of the map. They can then transition to the conclusion of the map, the map creator came to, and then they can contrast and extend a critique based on what they've read and observed within that very narrow presentation. So the following presentation will take us through the discussion of usability and interaction that resulted in the idea of direct interaction. So in this working paper that we're working on, direct interaction is defined as the control of web map form and function resulting in a user interaction intended by the designer and developed in a way that is transparent and explicitly ethical. So in consideration of how and why a creator can and should control parts of the map in certain ways, our initial approach is through the form and function of the map. So drawing on broader theoretical concepts on production of space and place, as argued by Henri Lefebvre, Doreen Massey, we examine the social aspects of space and place of web maps via their code space, which have the potential to produce varied effects through the reading. So essentially, instead of looking at them as a web map as something that merely delivers data in a nice visual way to a person, we look at the web map as a social space in and of itself to communicate certain spatial phenomena to a person reading it. So form and function flow from the web creator to the web map user, which becomes eventually the UX UI for their guided experience. We then have to ask what effects are being produced through the design of the creator to the user. How do we avoid black boxing of intent and meaning through the design, and ultimately at what point is too much interaction or design obscuring messaging through a web map? So by map creator intent, that refers to what the creator wants the map to do for the user. The map creator may be constrained by limitations of ability, tooling, depending on where they're located or what funding they have. In the process of producing their maps, a creator can also anticipate user needs and build in a manner that accounts for them by responsibility of being ethically transparent. Ultimately falls on the creator. So in observation of that, drawing on the visual methods of Chilean Rose, we can use the concept of audiencing for web maps in understanding that once one puts out art or a cartographic product, the audience then has ownership of interpretation and understanding of the web map. The audience is reproducing and reinterpreting the message of the map and its utility over time. By limiting their actions, the message of the creator of the map can be preserved and directed more so than traditional maps while mitigating aspects of misinterpretation, which are always a hazard when putting these things out on the web. So a simplified narrative approach provides transparent intent of the creator. Direct interaction helps provide a path whereby the user's engagement is more aligned with a statement of the map's about, and ultimately the creator's intention with the map. Which brings us to the issue of interaction. So once we have, because responsibility of the constraint and the interaction is on the map creator, their design must encompass the following considerations. First, we have multiple platforms. So television, desktops, tablets, smartphones. These are very different considerations for how we render web maps. In addition to that, we have multiple generations of people using different platforms. So you have older generations interacting with desktop, maybe television, maybe older media, whereas younger generations use smartphones, smaller medias. So both of these come in contact with cultures. So not from local to global, different cultures around the world use these technologies differently based on accessibility and availability. So once the map creator transforms the form and the function through a technology, the audience consumes and interprets the cartographic product through platforms, generations, cultures within unique scales of space and geography. So once we understand how our form and function are going to guide interaction, we also need to understand or need to develop a grammar for building these maps. The product of developing a web map will be used in different ways. And we need to understand how code translates into ethical language from development to delivery to a user. So first, we're kind of looking at how code translates into a language functionality. So when the web map creator undertakes development of a project through HTML, CSS, JavaScript, will ultimately manifest a functional visualization. And this is the first step from the creator to the map reader. Secondly, we need to understand how functionality transitions to usability through design. The map creator will then use elements of map design, which will be used in varying ways based on the meanings and messages the reader is intended to extract from that UX UI. But ultimately, both usability and functionality will lead to a certain type of direction the map creator has planned for the reader via the UX UI. This process translates into an outcome of how the user will utilize a cartographic project and not merely what they can use it for. So this brings us back to the topic of direct interaction. So with direct interaction, our first consideration is regarding intent, where the map creator must be clear in the problem statement of the map and the underlying data. This involves divulging all relevant information regarding the map's origins and its intended effect. Secondly, the map creator must provide a salient, transparent meaning for the map, which connects the intent to the map's message. This makes the map ethical and not merely functional. And third, through understanding the transparent, explicit intent and meaning, we then give the user a message which becomes a core of the narrative for the map. The message is used to create the map vis-a-vis the user UX UI. So once we understand how form and functionality kind of lead into and support different types of interactions, and ultimately how that's going to be interpreted and used by a user, we have to understand how we can get that feedback back from them via user engagement. So the process of user engagement and feedback is a critical aspect of web mapping. In fact, web map creators have a unique ability with web maps to understand and control the unknowns of a map, such as perspectives and position of the user. The map creator wants the map to become effective. If the map creator wants the map to become effective, they must understand the map as a social product. So as we transition from implementation of direct interaction and the resultant audiencing of that map, we have to also understand how that development for those users ultimately results in a certain type of feedback that we get based on what we deploy to them. Within the smaller path of direct interaction, there's wiggle room for unintended consequences which may occur, but by giving them a much smaller path to travel when understanding our research and our web map, we've minimized certain effects that might be criticized or outright refuted over time. So specialized tools built towards direct interaction will not only provide a superior UX, the feedback will be much more valuable because it's much more directed at what the map's supposed to be delivering to the user. This requires planned and implemented tooling to make this process a living one. So, a useful way to approach, I don't think it's working. A useful approach to user engagement can be found through the work on landscapes by D.W. Meinig. Meinig was concerned with the viewing of landscapes and how they changed based on the user's viewing and position within a space of experience. So as we move beyond flat screens into VR and AR, direct interaction will become much more critical because as form and function of interaction shift into newer generations of map readers, the language of direct interaction will assist in ethical design practices to help them better cope with what messages they're receiving through that medium. So using the above concepts, the UX UI of a web map should facilitate a dialogue between, once again, the map creator and the map's multiple audiences. This has the potential to manifest and propagate a transparent and ethical social product because we're giving them a much more narrow narrative via the research and a much more directed message. So it's through dialogue via the map that the processes of engagement with map viewers focuses the feedback to the map creator. And ultimately, as dialogue increases through the map, the biases potentially become more overt and their control potentially becomes better understood. So this brings us to kind of the elemental frameworks that we've currently found that are useful in kind of creating better web map experiences for people from social scientists and other people that are doing research that will have to have a controlled environment to give it to their user base. So once again, an examination of the current paradigms present in modern web mapping with a focus on effective engagement with the users, we present several guidelines towards how we should implement direct interaction as a process. The first is a map narrative, which should be designed for optimal transparency. This controls the meaning of the map, which is in the hands of both the creator and the user. Secondly, maps should be designed in such a way that it exposes bias of the map creator in an explicit manner. This involves direct interaction that guides the users towards a dialogue with the map and the map creators, exposing the intent, meaning, message of the map. Thirdly, maps should be designed with simple, guided, and legible UX UI. Once again, minimizing the widgets and the amount of stuff they can do with it to make sure they're getting the meaning and the clear messaging that map is supposed to be providing to them. Which, once again, if you're exposing intent, meaning, and messages, you're also minimizing the problematics that exist with risk of misinterpretation of the map. And fourth, but not finally, mapping and the production of maps should be undertaken and documented with explicit ethics. And I think ethics are kind of a big thing in data circles right now, but are something that should be brought into the cartographic production circles. The map creator should maintain explicitness of bias through description within the map's narrative. This documenting of bias should support the effect of transparency with users. Both bias and transparency are developed and deployed within the language of their specific form and function of direct interaction. So the language of narrative and its design must express in what ways the experience was limited by the map creator. The map creator must explain why and how too many paths on the topic and the problems the map addresses will not lead to effective dialogue between the creator and the map readers/users. No shortcuts therefore no shortcuts should be taken in the drafting of narrative. A narrative that's too concise runs the risk of alienating map readers, failing to establish relevance or sensitivity to the map user base, and ultimately failing to establish meaningful dialogue with the reader, meaning that we don't get valuable feedback from them. So that very long diatribe in conclusion, these are just a few guidelines in this working draft that we have that are have established as a base for our initial exploration of direct interaction. With this presentation, we've attempted to elaborate on the potentials of direct interaction as we move from initial form and functionality of web maps. We'll begin to connect the language of development and design with resultant user engagement and dialogue with map readers, which hopefully will result in a social product that is a web map and not merely something that's a static data delivery system. Direct interaction and its processes focus on user engagement. It's still an ethical mandate to expose biases while maintaining transparency of the map creator's intent, meaning, and message. And as technologies progress into newer mediums such as VR, AR, direct interaction will assist map creators in delivery of web UX UI that takes into account the effects of the modes of interaction on the user base. And to date, we have found scroll maps with effective narrative practices as outlined above and as kind of seen throughout the presentation as good examples demonstrating practices of direct interaction. And with that, I thank you. And if you have any questions. I know I didn't present that well, so there must be some questions out there. Yeah.
Yeah, at the beginning you made a specific comment that you were not conflating narrative maps and story maps. So
Yes.
different people define those in different ways, and I just want to hear your take on how they do it.
So from a social sciences researcher perspective, story maps are more tantamount to imaginaries. You know, we can give them spatial data, give them representations, but with story maps, you're leaving the interpretation and the understanding of the map more to the user. What I'm approaching here with direct interaction and narrative mapping is saying, as a person that's creating a map that understands the data better than the user, how do I best deliver a message to them and help guide them through the process that I've just went through with my research to a person that has little or no knowledge of that data and that spatial knowledge. So in terms of reproducing that spatial knowledge and actually getting feedback from the users, it behooves me to produce a better web map visualization UX UI that help me better develop the research as a community base and a social process rather than a static delivery of this is my web map, here's my data, you deal with it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much better than the write-up. The presentation is kind of limited in what I can cover. So, cool. Any other? Yeah.
You mentioned that at the very end that scrolling is an effective method.
Yes.
What other methods did you look at, and what makes scrolling
So, like I said, scrolling, I looked at most modern web UX UI practices, mostly stuff that's provided through simple user-based map UIs like Mapbox provides, Cardo, stuff like that. So traditional web map practices. But the reason I picked scroll maps as kind of the easy is because we can take the legend that is usually kind of put off to the side and stuff that Robinson and Bertrand kind of like didn't address with a lot of their earlier research, and put that at the forefront of a map experience. So take the legend and deconstruct that as an actual narrative, a story, to let the user to know before they even look at the map what they're be looking at. So to take away their imaginary component and give them more of a structure to their map experience. So that's kind of why I went with that.
One last question.
Yeah.
In that vein, do you think there's a type of decision-making process a cartographer needs to go when doing scroll maps because of just realistically the amount of time people spend on average on a single visualization or website these days? Do you think there's a demand for people having the finished product at the top and then starting the scroll process, or do you think we should do that door counter?
I can do this. Ooh, there we go. So I always put the text first, and that's what I would kind of recommend, is because if you give them the interactive map first, for the usability factor, they're going to spend a lot of time manipulating that map, but they're going to start generating their own narrative in their heads, and that they're going to have the power to preface the argument before they get to engage with your thought process beforehand. So that's why I go with minimal interactions and put your presentation up first so the users know exactly where you're coming from with that web map experience. Is that?
I guess we're also talking about the difference between an exploratory versus an explanatory.
Yes. Yeah.
Classes
Mm-hmm.
of a web map. It's sort of
It can be, yes, but like I said, with direct interaction, you're really looking at the explanatory rather than the exploratory. Exploratory gives users much more leeway to interpret the map the way they want to. With an explanatory approach, you give them much more structured exploration through the map creator's eyes, which, once again, it's also about putting the onus back on the map creator and producer to say, this is what the map should be saying, do you agree or disagree? Rather than having the user say, I think this. Am I correct? Is that? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.